As of today, the Islamic Republic of Iran is experiencing what may be the most catastrophic diplomatic collapse in its modern history. This is not hyperbole. This is not speculation. This is documented fact unfolding in real time across multiple continents and confirmed by sources ranging from Reuters to the Wall Street Journal to official government statements that cannot be walked back or denied. The regime in Tehran just watched its most carefully constructed foreign policy illusion shatter in front of the entire world, and the fracture lines are still spreading. What happened at the BRICS Foreign Minister Summit in New Delhi on May 15th, 2026, represents something far more devastating than a failed diplomatic meeting. It represents the complete and total exposure of Iran's strategic miscalculation, a miscalculation so fundamental that everything the Islamic Republic has built since 2022 now rests on a foundation that no longer exists. For years, Tehran told its people and told the world that BRICS was its insurance policy, that this alliance of emerging powers, this coalition of nations standing against Western dominance, would always close ranks when America or Israel applied pressure. That Russia, China, India, Brazil, South Africa, and the newer members would form an unbreakable wall of solidarity around Iran whenever the chips were down. On May 15th in New Delhi, every single one of those assumptions was tested, and every single one of them failed. Not quietly, not privately, not in some backroom negotiation where face could be saved and narratives could be managed. Publicly, irreversibly, in front of every camera, every diplomat, every analyst watching from Washington to Beijing to Tel Aviv. The BRICS alliance, the organization Iran joined with such fanfare, the grouping of nations that was supposed to prove the multipolar world had arrived, could not even produce a joint statement, not a strongly worded condemnation, not a carefully worded expression of concern, not even the kind of polite diplomatic nothing that international bodies manufacture as easily as breathing. Nothing. Zero. Complete deadlock. According to multiple reports from CNBC and Reuters, the two-day summit of BRICS foreign ministers ended on May 15th, with India as the host country and 2026 chair, forced to release what was diplomatically described as a chair's statement and outcome document. This is not normal. This has never happened before in BRICS history, and the document itself, thin and carefully worded as it was, explicitly acknowledged that there were differing views among some members as regards the situation in the West Asia Middle East region. Differing views. That is diplomatic code for we have members who are at war with each other, and we cannot agree on anything. Iran is the reason that language exists in that document. Iran is the reason the summit failed. Iran did this to itself, and now the entire world is watching the consequences unfold in real time. To understand just how catastrophic this moment is for the Islamic Republic, you need to understand what BRICS was supposed to represent for Tehran. When Iran formally joined the bloc in the major expansion that brought the total membership to 10 full members, including the UAE, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Saudi Arabia, the Iranian regime celebrated it as historic validation. State media ran wall-to-wall coverage, officials delivering speeches about the new multipolar world order rising to replace American hegemony. The narrative being transmitted to the Iranian public was clear, deliberate, and absolutely central to the regime's legitimacy. We are not isolated. The world is not against us. We have powerful friends. Russia is with us. China is with us. India is with us. Brazil, South Africa, Egypt, Ethiopia, they are all with us. The West can sanction us, threaten us, pressure us all at once, but BRICS stands as proof that there is another world out there that respects Iran and values its position. That was the story. That was the strategic comfort blanket the regime wrapped around itself and its people. And on May 15th in New Delhi, that blanket was ripped away in front of everybody. because here is what actually happened inside that summit room, as reported by the Wall Street Journal and confirmed by diplomatic sources across the region. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araqchi, arrived in New Delhi expecting, reasonably enough, given what BRICS was supposed to represent, that he would walk out with a unanimous statement from all 10 member nations condemning the US and Israeli strikes on Iran. He pushed for language explicitly recognizing that the United States and Israel had initiated the conflict and had carried out what he called unlawful aggression against Tehran. He stood at the podium and told his fellow foreign ministers that BRICS can and must become one of the principal pillars in shaping a more just, balanced, and humane global order. He urged members to take concrete action to halt warmongering. He appealed to the room. He made his case with all the diplomatic skill he could muster. And then the UAE stood up, and everything Araqchi thought he knew about how this meeting was going to go collapsed on the floor. The UAE's representative did not merely decline to support Iran's proposed language. He did something Iran had not prepared for at all. He used his own statement to single out Iran directly, demanding that the BRICS summit instead condemn Iranian attacks on Gulf states and on civilian shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. He called for language condemning Iranian strikes on energy infrastructure and civilian targets across the region. In other words, the UAE did not come to this BRICS meeting to help Iran. It came to this BRICS meeting to put Iran on the record as the aggressor, and it did exactly that, right in front of every other member of the bloc, right in front of Araqchi himself. The Iranian foreign minister, who had flown to New Delhi expecting solidarity, instead found himself sitting across from a BRICS colleague who was publicly and formally accusing his country of terrorism. According to sources cited by ABC News, the room went silent. And then India, trying desperately to hold the meeting together from its position as chair, acknowledged what was now impossible to deny. There would be no joint statement. India's foreign minister, Subramanyam Jaishankar, threading the needle between his country's economic interests, its diplomatic relationships, and its neutrality in the conflict, called for safe, unimpeded maritime flows through international waterways, including the Strait of Hormuz. He reminded members pointedly that it is essential for the smooth advancement of BRICS that newer members fully appreciate and subscribe to the BRICS consensus on various important issues. Translation: the newer members, by which everyone in the room understood he meant Iran, were the ones breaking the consensus. Iran was the problem. Iran was the reason BRICS had failed to speak with one voice. Now listen to how Araqchi responded afterward in his press statement, because this is where the panic really starts to show. He told reporters, without ever naming the UAE directly but making it absolutely obvious who he was talking about, that the final statement had been blocked by a member state which has its own special relations with Israel. He said, and these words deserve to be heard carefully, "We have no difficulty with that certain country. They have not been our target in the current war. We only hit American military bases and American military installations, which are unfortunately in their soil." So Iran's foreign minister was standing in front of the press after the biggest diplomatic humiliation his country has suffered in the BRICS context, and trying to tell the world that Iran never targeted the UAE, that the missiles and drones that have repeatedly struck UAE territory since the war began were only aimed at American military bases that happen to be located inside the UAE, that it is not Iran's fault that the UAE chose to host American military assets, and that Iranian missiles ended up hitting UAE soil as a result. That is the argument. That is the explanation Iran's top diplomat offered to the world. We only hit American military bases. The fact that those bases are in UAE territory is a UAE problem, not our problem. And then, in what may be the single most extraordinary closing statement of his press conference, Araqchi looked at the cameras and told the UAE, Israelis cannot protect them. Americans cannot protect them. That was proved during this war. If they follow the line of wisdom, they will find Iran as a good neighbor. He was threatening the UAE at a BRICS press conference after the UAE had just blocked Iran's resolution at a BRICS summit. He was delivering what any reasonable observer would characterize as a warning. Stop opposing us, or remember that your American protectors cannot save you. This is the foreign minister of a country that is currently losing a war, whose economy is projected to contract by 6% this year, according to the International Monetary Fund, whose oil storage is 85% full and running out of room, whose blockaded tankers are floating helplessly in the Gulf of Oman, and he is threatening one of his own BRICS partners at a press conference. The psychology of a cornered regime is not subtle, but what Araqchi's bravado cannot change is the reality of what India did immediately after that summit ended. Because the day the BRICS meeting concluded in deadlock, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi flew directly to Abu Dhabi. Not to Tehran, not to Moscow, not to Beijing, to Abu Dhabi, the capital of the country Iran's foreign minister had just been thinly veiling threats at. And in Abu Dhabi, as reported by Reuters on May 16, 2026, Modi sat down with UAE President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed and signed a major strategic defense partnership framework between India and the UAE. A framework that covered defense industrial collaboration, advanced technology cooperation, maritime security, and cyber defense. Modi publicly stated that he had renewed his emphasis on India's condemnation of the attacks that targeted the United Arab Emirates in the strongest terms. The Indian Prime Minister explicitly condemned Iranian attacks on UAE soil at the same moment that Iran was telling the world that BRICS solidarity was paramount. The host of the BRICS summit was flying to Abu Dhabi to sign a military partnership with the country Iran had just been threatening in a press conference. If you are watching this story unfold, and you want to stay ahead of every major development as it breaks, then make sure you subscribe to Liza Grant Reports right now, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. This channel brings you the analysis and the context that mainstream outlets will not touch. And the next 72 hours are going to be absolutely critical for understanding where this crisis goes next. India also raised fuel prices by 3% in the days following the summit, a direct economic consequence of Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz, affecting over 1 billion people. Among them, 4.3 million Indian citizens living and working in the UAE. Every Indian worker in Dubai who is paying more for fuel, every Indian family back home paying more for cooking gas, every Indian farmer paying more for fertilizer, all of them are paying the price of Iran's decisions. And India's government knows that. And India's government acted accordingly. And then, just to ensure that the universe had properly piled on, 12 Arab and Islamic countries gathered in Riyadh and issued a joint statement condemning Iran's attacks as heinous. According to a statement published on May 17, 2026, and reported by the Wall Street Journal, the foreign ministers of Qatar, Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Egypt, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates stood together and accused Iran of deliberately targeting residential areas, oil facilities, airports, and diplomatic premises across the region. Pakistan, which had been quietly attempting to play mediator between Washington and Tehran, which had been trying to position itself as a neutral diplomatic voice, signed a statement calling Iranian attacks heinous. Egypt signed it. Turkey signed it. Saudi Arabia, whose own oil infrastructure Iran had targeted, signed it. This was not a statement organized by the United States or Israel. This was Iran's own neighbors, Iran's fellow Muslim nations, Iran's regional partners, 12 of them, unanimously telling the world that what Iran has been doing in this war is terrorism. There is no other word for it. We want the strait open. We do not want Iran nuclear. And by the way, we are pledging not to supply Tehran with weapons. And then came the moment that truly revealed how desperate and isolated Iran has become. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson posted publicly on social media, "He who betrays in secret shall be exposed in public." Iran's government was publicly accusing China of betrayal. China, the one major power that had been most consistently supportive of Iran through years of isolation and sanctions. The country whose discount oil purchases had been one of Tehran's primary lifelines. The country whose Silk Road investments across the region had helped sustain what remained of Iran's economic connections to the wider world. Iran called China a traitor on social media in an official statement because Xi Jinping told Trump he wanted the Strait of Hormuz open. This is what diplomatic desperation looks like when it has completely abandoned any pretense of strategic thinking. Alienating China publicly, in writing, at the exact moment when China's potential diplomatic intervention is one of the few cards Iran has left to play. This is not strategy. This is a regime that has lost its composure and is screaming at the walls. And the walls are not listening, because the economic picture inside Iran right now is so bad that even the regime's own officials cannot keep the truth contained. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent confirmed publicly on May 18, 2026, that Iran's oil storage is approximately 80% full and filling up at a rate that will force complete shutdown within weeks. The Karg Island terminal, which handles around 90% of Iranian oil exports, the single most important piece of economic infrastructure in the entire country, had its storage tanks sitting at 85% capacity, up 3% in just the preceding days, according to data reported by Bloomberg. This is a terminal filling up. This is an oil industry staring at the moment when it has nowhere left to put its own product. And when that moment arrives, Iran will not have a choice. It will have to start shutting down oil wells. And shutting down oil wells is not like turning off a tap. These are complex industrial systems, many of them running on infrastructure that is decades old, that has been poorly maintained under years of sanctions, that has been damaged by the strikes and instability of this war. Once you shut them down, restarting them is enormously difficult, enormously expensive, and in some cases, simply impossible if the equipment has deteriorated too far. The IMF is forecasting a 6.1% contraction of the Iranian economy in 2026. Senior Iranian officials have privately admitted, according to sources cited by the Financial Times, that it may take more than a decade to rebuild the war-shattered economy. A decade. And now the oil fields are about to go offline. Meanwhile, the Gulf states that Iran threatened and attacked throughout this conflict are doing something that will haunt Tehran for a generation. They are engineering their way out of dependence on the Strait of Hormuz entirely. The UAE, which already operates one oil pipeline running across the country to a port on the other side of the strait, is building a second one. When both are operational, the UAE will be able to export roughly 70% of its pre-war oil volume without routing a single barrel through Iranian-controlled waters. Saudi Arabia is already using its cross-country pipeline to ship oil to the Red Sea, completely bypassing the strait. Iraq is in discussions with Turkey to build a multi-country pipeline that would carry Iraqi oil overland through multiple nations all the way to Europe. No strait required. Qatar, which was already building new LNG infrastructure, is accelerating those projects. Country by country, one pipeline and terminal at a time. The Persian Gulf is building the infrastructure to make Iran's single most powerful strategic weapon, its ability to threaten the Strait of Hormuz, progressively less relevant. This will not happen overnight. But in 5 years, in 10 years, the geography that Iran has wielded as a geopolitical trump card for decades will matter significantly less than it does today. And Iran's leadership, watching this happen, knows exactly what it means. The leverage they thought they would hold permanently is being systematically engineered away, and they are not going to be able to stop it. Now let us be precise about what has happened to the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, because this is the organization that is now effectively running what remains of Iran's war strategy. And understanding what it has become helps explain why Iran keeps doing things that make no rational sense. When the US and Israeli strikes killed Supreme Leader Khamenei and decimated Iran's civilian and political leadership structure, what remained most intact was the IRGC. The IRGC has spent years building parallel power structures, its own revenue streams through regional smuggling networks and shadow economy operations, its own chain of command that operates independently of the civilian government. And here is the terrifying part. The IRGC, according to foreign policy analysts cited by CBS News, is very resistant to economic pressure. Even if the Iranian economy completely collapses, even if ordinary Iranians are starving, even if the currency is worthless, even if the oil fields go dark, the IRGC has its own sources of money. It has its own supply chains. It does not need the Iranian state to function. As one analyst put it bluntly, even if the economy collapses, the IRGC is okay, and they are the ones doing the negotiating. What this means in plain language is that the people who are deciding whether Iran makes a deal, the people who are currently blocking the kind of nuclear concessions that would end the blockade and restart the economy, are the people who are least affected by the economic suffering the blockade is causing. The IRGC commanders sitting in whatever hardened bunkers they are operating from right now are not worrying about the price of eggs. They are not feeling the IMF's 6.1% economic contraction in their personal finances. They have their smuggling networks. They have their shadow revenues. They have their foreign militias still operating. They are fine. The 30 million plus Iranians watching their savings evaporate and their food prices spiral are the ones who are not fine. And the people who are not fine are not the ones making the decisions. This is the structural trap Iran has fallen into and cannot escape through any normal mechanism. The IRGC sees this war as an opportunity to consolidate power over the Iranian state at a moment when the political and civilian leadership was physically eliminated. A Forbes analysis published on May 20th, 2026, described the ascension of the current figurehead leadership as IRGC consolidation behind a planted figurehead. The Guard is running the show now, and the Guard's institutional interest is not in making a deal that strips Iran of nuclear enrichment capability, because that capability is one of the Guard's primary sources of leverage and prestige. The Guard's institutional interest is in prolonging ambiguity for as long as possible, while its own economic operations continue undisturbed. The Iranian people are paying the price. The Iranian economy is paying the price, and the BRICS alliance just shattered over it. Look at what Trump said about the nuclear negotiations to understand where this is heading. He looked at Iran's latest peace proposal, the one that was supposed to restart negotiations, and said, "If I don't like the first sentence, I just throw it away." He described Iran's request for a 20-year nuclear moratorium as acceptable in principle, but absolutely requiring real guarantees, real verification, and the removal of what he called nuclear dust, the highly enriched uranium that US and Israeli strikes bury deep underground, and that Iran claims it cannot remove, because as Iranian officials reportedly told Trump directly, according to sources cited by the New York Times, only the United States or China has the technology to extract it from those depths. Think about what that means for a second. Iran is reportedly telling American negotiators that the enriched uranium buried under its soil can only be removed by American or Chinese technology. The material that makes Iran a near-nuclear state is sitting in holes in the ground that only its enemies have the tools to clean up. And Trump said Iran agreed to remove it and then took it back. This is the negotiation. This is where the talks stand. Iran says yes to things and then says no. Iran sends proposals that Trump throws away after the first sentence. and the blockade keeps costing around $500 million a day. $500 million every day since April 13th. Do the math yourself. In just the first 6 weeks of the blockade, Iran lost over $20 billion in oil revenue. $20 billion gone, while its storage tanks fill up, while its oil fields inch toward shutdown, while its BRICS partners fight each other in conference rooms in New Delhi, while India signs defense partnerships with the UAE, while China tells Trump it wants the Strait open and pledges not to arm Tehran, while 12 Islamic nations in Riyadh draft a statement calling Iranian attacks heinous, while Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson calls China a traitor on social media, while the UAE builds a pipeline designed to make the Strait of Hormuz strategically irrelevant to its economy. Make absolutely sure you subscribe to Eliza Grant Reports and hit that notification bell, because the developments coming in the next 72 hours are going to reshape the entire Middle East, and you need to be watching this story as it happens in real time. The world is watching Tehran, and Tehran is running out of options.